Welcome to the next segment of today's Business Today program, and this is the market research segment where we analyze and tell you about the recent trends in the market. And for that, we have Arshad Ismail joining from the Frontier Research as an associate today on the program with us, as usual.
Hi.
Great to have you on board.
Thank you, Arun. Good to be back.
Great. So, first topic for the day is about the inflation and how this is affecting the economic growth and the pathway of it.
Right. Okay. So, one good thing about the economy now, we've been talking about crises and crises. So, the good thing about the economy right now is we've been able to bring inflation down. So, we saw last month in June where the monthly inflation, the annual inflation, read at around 6.2%. So, we've brought it down to a mid single digit. So, kudos to the central bank and their tight monetary policy enabled to being doing that. So, given all of this, what does this mean to growth now? Now, if you look at last year, in order to curtail inflation, we had really high interest rates. Now, that was a big factor that affected the negative growth. So, last year was the year with the worst economic growth. Even the first quarter this year, we did see negative growth of around 11%. And now that inflation is coming down, the central bank has the ability to focus on growth. So, we did see during the last two monetary policy review meetings, the central bank brought policy rates down initially by 250 basis points and then again by 200 basis points. So currently the policy rates lie at around 11 to 12%. So things like this, how does this affect the economy is these policy rates does affect the other market interest rates, and one such is the lending rate. So the fall in these policy rates could bring a downfall of the lending rates, which could improve private sector credit. Now, that is very important for economic growth. The private sector needs to invest. And not just that, right? We recently saw the central bank bring down the statutory reserve requirement to 2%. So this also improves market liquidity, thereby again driving interest rates down. So things like this, the government is currently working on to boost economic growth. And not just this, we also see import restrictions being taken off because of pressure by the IMF. Now, that again can help a lot of sectors, the apparel sector to the construction sector. So again, driving economic growth. So overall, what we feel now is that the central bank has moved their stance. They've moved from, controlling inflation to now supporting the economy to actually grow, because we've had really bad growth and there have been so many sectors that have been suffering. So that's the change that we see now in terms of inflation and growth.
Okay, so for someone who wants to invest in these areas or in these market or industries, this is a good time?
Yes, it should be. So it's not something that would give in results like, let's say, in a month or two, right? So long term, yes, we do see now, it's like this. I think we've come to the bottom, right? There is no bottom more to go in, So it's going to be a gradual uprise. So it's a good time.
Right, so you're basically adding fuel to an igniting engine. So you're basically adding fuel to that. Okay, great. All right, so this can be linked to the IMF growth and also IMF discussion on how the IMF is assisting Sri Lanka to revive. How is that happening right
now? So in terms of the IMF program, I think we've actually done well. So this is the 17th time that we've approached the IMF itself. And in terms of that, so far, we've done pretty okay. We've undertaken the much needed reforms. We've increased our taxes. We've passed the anti-corruption bill. We've passed the new Central Bank Act. So we've been doing all right. Okay, and then what's to come is we do have our first review that's supposed to happen towards the mid of September. Now, passing this first review, meeting the criteria is essential so that we get the second set of disbursements. So in terms of analyzing how Sri Lanka has performed so far in terms of meeting this criteria, I feel we've done okay. Right? I don't see a major thing that the IMF would be concerned of, to cause a big delay in the disbursement. I don't think there is something like that. But one thing that Sri Lanka will have to definitely look at is restructuring their external debt. Now, we've done okay with restructuring the domestic debt. We've come forward with certain conditions that doesn't really harm the financial system. Now, it's time we get the external part right.
And the internal parts were in line with the IMF
Yes,
agreements.
The internal parts were all right. So it's in a line to meet the IMF targets of the gross financing needs and all of it. It's all right. The external part is now a big thing that Sri Lanka has to look into, because there have been countries like, for example, Zambia, who's not been able to properly restructure their external debt. Now this has, kind of derailed the IMF program. The IMF has not given them the funds unless they, properly get this into play. So those kind of things could become a threat, but as far as we look at Sri Lanka, we're kind of doing okay. So we've seen progress, right? We've seen the Paris Club come forward and, giving their support. We've seen countries like India, Japan, right? All of them, kind of supporting. So this is kind of okay-ish, I would say. I don't see a big reason that our program could get derailed a lot. But overall, it's too hard to say about the whole program, because this is a 48-month program. We are only 6 months down the line. So what could happen 2-3 years down the line, we'd never know, because there could be a lot of threats, right, including the political scenario that comes into play maybe, right? So there could be threats, but so far we're all right in terms of the IMF.
But it's great to see that there's a growth actually, and also hear that from you, like an analyst as you. And also, what about the exchange rate? Because now with these tweaks, definitely exchange rates gets affected and also changed. Where is this heading?
True. So we saw the exchange rate was at 360, come down to around 320. So to give you a precise answer of exactly where it's heading, I'll say I don't have an exact number, right? But I can give you certain factors that could drive the exchange rate up, that could cause a depreciation, and also certain factors that could be favorable. So maybe if we start off with let's say the factors that are good, right? The ones that are actually favorable for our exchange rate, we've seen our worker remittances and tourism improve a lot. So we've seen the government take so much of measures for tourism currently. We've surpassed the 800,000 mark for tourist arrivals in August. So the target is around 2 million for this year, which I feel is a little optimistic, but even if we can get close to that, which will bring a lot of revenue into the country. And also in terms of worker remittances, we saw this fall during COVID. Now it's gradually rising back. So we have worker remittances of around 400 to 500 million coming every month. So that's now a good sign. So we have tourism inflows coming, we have worker remittances coming. So these can definitely help, appreciate the exchange rate, can help the, rupee value go up. So apart from this, there is also inflows from multilaterals. Now, like I said, there is the second disbursement of IMF funds that's supposed to come. There could be World Bank funds. There could be funds from the ADB that can come in. So all of these inflows also can yet again help our exchange rate to some extent. But in terms of what would push the exchange rate back, let's say, maybe back to a 360, or even more, is number one is we see that imports are now starting to grow, given that import restrictions are taken off, given that the market interest rates are going down. So all of this will cause imports to rise, and more imports again would mean more money going out. Could cause somewhat of a depreciation. And then we again have some of our debt repayments to be made, right? We've already paying our multilaterals, our previous IMF debt, and there is also a Bangladesh swap of 200 million that's due somewhere around in September. There is a ACU credit line that needs to be paid somewhere around in the second half of this year. There is an Indian credit line that has to be paid somewhere around in 2024. So all of these means outflows. Now these cause a depreciation pressure, and more importantly, in the world, if you look at the world, it's not performing that great. If you look at Sri Lanka's main export markets, the US, the European Union, they've not been doing that great these days. So now that again is a threat to our exporters, which might reduce the amount of money coming. So those are the things that could drive up the exchange rate. So there is, it's a balance. There is certain factors that could appreciate the exchange rate, like the worker remittances, the tourism, and the other multilateral inflows, and you also have the factors that could drive it up. So overall, what I feel is this period can be a highly volatile period. Now, for example, we saw last time when the first set of IMF funds came in, we did see the exchange rate appreciating. It's the market sentiment that changes. So that causes a big effect. So maybe now, given that the second disbursement comes in, we can again see something like so. There will be high levels of volatility in terms of the exchange rate.
Right. So that's about the exchange rate. And if you also speak about, still talking about the country, the threats and the challenges that Sri Lanka might have to face in the future, in the near future, what would they be?
So if you look at threats, I think there's two things that come to my mind, right? The first thing is the elections. Now, given that we've not had an election for so far, 2024 can be a year with 3 elections, right? There is a presidential election due somewhere around in October, November. There could be a parliamentary election that could come in, and also the local government elections, which was supposed to happen this year, which has been now pushed indefinitely. Now that could also happen. So a year with elections brings a lot of threat. Now, why do I say that? Is because usually if you look at Sri Lanka in the past, during years of elections, we've not been performing well in terms of our fiscal aspects. So we've seen, the government put in a lot of popularist policies where they've cut tax rates, they've increased government salaries, spent more infrastructure during, these election years. Now, that kind of thing is going against what the IMF has in mind. So the IMF says that we need to increase our tax revenue, we need to bring up our primary surplus. So things like these, right, could maybe deviate the government's focus from, maybe winning an election rather than following a IMF program. So that is one threat. And another thing that I see is the climate impact. Now this is not something that's only in Sri Lanka. We currently do see a lot of droughts that's there in the country. But however, currently it's but okay because we do expect rain to come around maybe somewhere in October. But the problem lies what after that. Now, how does this affect the country is mainly in 2 aspects. One is our energy, electricity generation. So as you all know, a lot of Sri Lanka's electricity either is fuel based or is through hydro. So now, given that we have a shortfall of hydro, given that we have a shortfall of rainfall, maybe we will have to import more emergency fuel to cover that backup. Now that could mean dollars going out of the country again. And or else we might have to resort to some sort of power cuts. Now that could again cause the public to panic. Now those kind of things are definitely threats. But so far, like I said, it's okay because we do expect rain to come in the next 1 or 2 months. But the problem again lies what happens in the first half of 2024. Will the government go into having power cuts? But then again, given that it's an election year, that could cause a lot of panic. And or will the government use their important reserves to buy emergency fuel? So all of this again factors in. And again, we also have an impact on food production. The drought has destroyed a lot of agricultural crops. Now, this rises food prices as well. So I think those are the major threats that we have. Number one, in terms of the climate and also the elections coming. Those I think are challenges that we'll have to address well if we are to go forward.
Okay, we have one more question. This is actually about the property tax that's going to be in place by 2025.
Right.
Bit of insight about that.
So it's something like this, right? Now, as the IMF says, they do have certain targets for government revenue to come up by 2025. So one such thing that the government is looking at, or something that the IMF has recommended themselves, is to implement a property tax system in Sri Lanka. So if you look at property taxes itself, it's not something that is very easy to implement. I would say it would take a lot of time. So that is why they've given us time until 2025. We have to decide on a suitable tax base. We need to finalize our tax rates. Now those kind of things can definitely become challenges. So we do have a team from the IMF coming in to guide us on this. They will be doing a market research. They will be letting us know about our property valuation system as well. So determining a suitable tax base. What are we going to tax? Are we going to tax the rental value? Are we going to tax the land area? Or are we going to tax the property value itself? Now these are challenges because all of these bases have their own limitations. And then deciding on a proper tax rate, right? If you look at normal, in average, other countries charge around 2 to 4%. So in general, these property taxes bring around 0.3% of tax to revenue GDP in a middle income country. Maybe we could also expect a a revenue of something similar to that if that is implemented. But there are so many challenges, like I said, determining the tax rate, the tax base, and also even forming a proper tax register, including all the properties in the tax register. Now, we've had countries like Chile where they have had property taxes, but most of the property are not included in the tax register itself. Now, that's another problem. Then again, we might have a shortfall of valuers in Sri Lanka valuing this property so that it could be properly be taxed. Now, those are all challenges. That's why it's not something that is easy, but definitely something the government should look at maybe going forward in the next 1 year. They need to work on it, and then maybe by 2025 we could come up with something like a property tax.
All right, okay, that was a great insight coming to you from today's program, and that was Arshad Ismail, Associated Frontier Researcher, joining us today. Thank you so much for joining in once again.
Thank you.
And for the viewers out there, with that we are winding up today's Business Today program. We'll be connecting with you in the next episode.